Hi everyone! Today we will be telling the story of Baal, the Canaanite storm god associated with fertility. The story comes from the so-called Baal Cycle text, which was discovered on a series of clay tablets in the 1920s in Ugarit, which is modern-day Ras Shamra, situated on the Mediterranean coast of northern Syria. The Baal cycle can be summarized as two parts. In part 1, Baal fights Yam, god of the seas and symbolic of chaos, and with the help of the war goddess Anat and the mother goddess Asherah, becomes king of the gods and is rewarded with his own temple, establishing him as the protector of order and vanquisher of chaos. In part 2, Baal seeks to subjugate Mot, the god of death and the underworld, but he fails and Mot kills him. Again it is Anat who comes to his rescue, helping him to overcome death. Interestingly, where Yam is slayed and not mentioned again, both Baal and Mot return to life after having been killed. So, where Yam stays dead and beaten, Mot eventually only submits to Baal, implying that death can ultimately not be defeated. I'll leave a link to an original translation of the full text below. Now, let's take a look at the story itself. Mighty Baal, son of Dagon, wanted to be king of the gods and contended with Yam, the son of El, for kingship. But El, father of the gods, favored his son and gave the kingship to Yam. Yam ruled the gods with an iron fist and forced them into labor. Unhappy, they cried to their mother, Asherah, lady of the sea, and convinced her to confront Yam and intercede on their behalf. And so Asherah went to Yam and begged him to release his grip upon the gods, offering him favors in return. But Yam declined her request and did not soften his heart. Finally, out of love for her children, Asherah offered her own body to Yam. Yam agreed to this, and Asherah returned to the court of El, explaining to the gods what had happened. Baal was infuriated, angry at the gods that they would allow such a thing, and swore that he would destroy Yam instead. Angered by this, Yam declared that the god should give Baal up to him. El listened, and declared that Baal would be Yam's slave, bringing tribute to Yam just like all the other gods. But Baal refused to bow to Yam, and declared again that he would slay the tyrant lord of the gods. And so Kotarvachasis, the god of crafts, gave Baal 2 clubs to fight with, naming them Yagrush and Aimur. Baal first fought with Yagrush, but the club was not strong enough to defeat Yam. He then fought with Aimur, striking Yam on the head and killing him. Baal was now king of the gods, lord of the mountain of Zaphon, but he had no palace like the other gods had, and sent Kotarvachasis to ask Asherah to allow him to build Baal a palace. Kotarvachasis went to the bellows and forged a crown, throne and footstool of gold and silver, and offered them to Asherah, mother of the 70 gods. He offered these gifts to her, and she allowed Baal and Anat to come before her and convince her to ask El to allow Baal a palace. Asherah went to El, at the sources of the 2 rivers, in the midst of the streams of the 2 deeps. She entered the house of El, bowed before him and fell by his feet, explaining to him that even though Baal was king of the gods, he had no palace of his own. El replied that a palace would be allowed for Baal, just like for all the other gods. Rejoicing, Baal sent for Kotarvachasis, who built a great house for Baal, and when it was completed, Baal held a great feast with the other gods to celebrate, and so became lord of all the world. Now after a time, Mot, god of death, declared that he alone would rule over the gods, command gods and men, dominate the multitudes of the earth. So Baal sent his messengers to the underworld, to Mot's city Hemri, to declare that he refused to pay tribute to Mot, even though he was the beloved of El. Mot was infuriated, and declared that, because Baal had destroyed the serpent Lotan, he would exact revenge by devouring Baal. This frightened Baal so much that he instantly surrendered to Mot, saying that he would belong to Mot forever. Mot was glad, for Baal would be delivered to him, and the fertility of the land would die with him. So Mot commanded that Baal be put in a grave of the gods of the earth. Taking his clouds, his wind, his storm, his reins, and his servants with him, as well as the goddess Pidre, girl of light, and the goddess Tale, girl of rain. And so Baal was found dead in the fields of Shechel Mehmet, in the land of Deber. The news reached El, who descended from his throne and poured ashes of grief on his head, dust of wallowing on his head. He covered himself with a double cloak, and roamed the mountain in mourning. He cut his cheek and chin, lacerated his forearms. He ploughed his chest like a garden. He slashed his back open like a valley, and declared, Baal is dead. Now Anat went down to the earth, searching every mountain and every hill until she came to the land of Deber, and found Baal's body lying in the fields of Shechel Mehmet. She mourned then, clothing herself in a double cloak, and disfiguring her body just like El had, shouting that Baal was dead. And when she was done crying, she ordered Shaphash, goddess of the sun and torch of the gods, to put Baal on her shoulders. She carried him to Mount Zaphon, and buried him in the grave of the gods of the earth. El then instructed Asherah to present one of her sons so that he could make him king. She presented Ashtar the terrible, god of war and rain, as king in Baal's stead. But when he went to sit on Baal's throne, his feet did not reach the footstool, and his head did not reach its top. And Ashtar the terrible said, I cannot rule in Baal's stead, and went down to the earth once more. Anat then went to face Mot, for she loved Baal like a son. Yield, my brother, she demanded of Mot, ripping his clothes. But Mot would not yield. Lifting her sword, she cleaved the god Mot. With a pitchfork she winnowed him, and with fire she burned him. She ground his remains in the millstones, and planted him in the fields. After this, El had a dream where he saw that Baal was still alive, and called to Anat, instructing her to send Shaphash to find Baal. Shaphash descended into the underworld, entering the realm of Sheol, and when she returned to the world above, she carried Baal with her. Now resurrected, Baal went into the heights of Mount Zaphon and confronted Mot, who had regenerated in the meantime. No longer afraid of Mot, Baal attacked and vanquished him, reclaiming his throne. But Mot said to Baal, Because of you I have experienced the humiliation. Because of you I experienced scattering by the sword, burning in the fire, grinding in the millstones, winnowing by the pitchfork. I experienced being planted in the fields and being sown in the sea. So Mot threatened to destroy Baal in revenge and take his kingship. But Baal expelled him once more, driving Mot out from the heights of Zaphon. They shook each other, gored each other, bit each other, kicked each other, their strength apparently equal, until Shaphash intervened, threatening Mot that he would lose El's favor if he continued to oppose Baal. Intimidated, Mot finally submitted, conceding the kingship to Baal, who once more returned to the heights of Mount Zaphon. Anat, though, did not go with him. Instead, she turned her anger to Baal's enemies, to those who were indecisive against Baal in his trials. She went down to a valley, fighting between two cities. She smote the people and destroyed mankind. Under her were heads like vultures. Over her were hands like locusts, the hands of troops like thorns. She piled heads on her back and tied hands together in a bundle. Knee-deep she plunged in the blood of soldiers, up to the neck in the gore of troops. Finally she reached her palace, but was still not satisfied. So she hurled chairs at the troops, tables at the soldiers, footstools at the heroes. She smote and looked, fought and saw. She delighted in the carnage as she shed the blood of soldiers. Finally sated, Anat poured the oil of peace from a bowl and washed her hands in the blood of the soldiers. Baal's rain then started falling. She gathered the rainwater and washed herself with it, and the animals and fish rejoiced. Thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe. Bye bye.